For the past few decades, our country has been really struggling with dialogue. I honestly believe dialogue is a skill. It's something that requires time and energy. It's something that you can be good at, something that you can learn. There's tools and techniques, and it's something that as you participate in dialogue, you get better at dialogue. You become a better conversation partner. You have more to offer. In the ancient world, they used to call this rhetoric. People would train just to be good at rhetoric, just to be good at speaking. They didn't necessarily know what they were talking about, but they could darn well say it well. So, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, as the typical American family started to change, people were no longer sitting around the dinner table as much. TV started to come onto the scene. The internet started to come onto the scene, and suddenly people aren't talking as much. Conversations and sound bites get shorter and shorter and shorter. Our attention spans get shorter and shorter and shorter. And so very important topics about our economy, about our global influence, about intervention in foreign wars and foreign governments, here at home, whether it's a social issue or an economic issue, these things become more isolated and siloed as people are willing to engage in these conversations. You could imagine as Facebook has come onto the scene and Twitter, people are literally reducing entire conversations that could take days or hours at least. They're condensing them into single paragraphs or 140 characters. This is not good for dialogue in general. This is not good for dialectic. Dialectic is this idea of two things kind of coming together and spinning around into like this cyclone where it kind of comes into a center. It's all about compromise. It's about synergy. It's about combining ideas and bringing things together. That's not what we're seeing right now. What we're seeing is more isolationism. We're seeing more people say, that's enough, I just don't even want to talk about it. I had this realization last night about the long form argument. I really think the long form argument is what we need right now in our society of short 140 character tweets. Think about what is really succeeding in our lives right now in the media. Television shows, the miniseries. The miniseries is the new blockbuster. Shows like Bridgerton and Queen's Gambit and Mandalorian are suddenly replacing the blockbuster movies that we used to be so accustomed to. That entire scene has changed. What else has changed? Podcasts, something that originally was like 15 or 20 minutes on average, has now, I would say the average podcast episode is at least 45 minutes, if not an hour 20 minutes. The most successful podcasts in the world, like Joe Rogan Experience, sometimes are 3.5 hours long. This is the new paradigm of communication. It's long form communication. It allows you to really flesh out concepts and ideas and get under the hood, because there's more to an idea than something that you can communicate in even a courtroom. Like we have this very analytical scientific idea of politics that here's like 5 pieces of information. If we could just prove that these 5 pieces of information are true, then I can know that my position is right or your position is wrong, vice versa. It's so much more complicated than that. There's so many more dynamics at stake here. But a lot of our anti-intellectualism that, I'm going to turn on my computer here. A lot of the anti-intellectualism that has started to come about in the world, it chafes against any conversation that goes beyond a couple of minutes. Some of the most important topics that need to be discussed right now, whether it's healthcare or global intervention about of Syria or something like that, even Israel, these are complex issues. This isn't like an evening conversation. This is something that takes hours and hours, days and days to discuss, multi-part conversations and arguments. I think where I was really convicted about this was in a lot of my recent studies have been focused on our founding fathers. So the writing of the Constitution, the formation of that governing body that eventually came out with the Declaration of Independence. These guys talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and slept and talked. And they just kept on communicating and discussing, and they went through every contingency of every argument, and they were structured and they were deliberate and intentional with everything that they said. And they didn't allow a 1 hour argument to bother them. Right now, this video is at 5 minutes. And I guarantee people are already thinking, oh, this is too long to watch. 5 minutes! And people are getting bored. What important thing in the world do you think can be solved in 5 minutes or 20 minutes? So anyways, my point is that we need to be willing to have these longer conversations. So here's what the point of this video is. As we as a society have lost track of how to have real communication, as we get offended by every little thing that pops up on our Facebook page, whenever we comment, my encouragement to you, what we need is for leaders who know how to communicate, who can be offended on Facebook when someone trolls them or makes fun of them, but still stay engaged and not allow that to sidetrack or derail the conversation. We need leaders to be engaged there, not run away to other platforms, not isolate themselves and silo and find taller thought silos. We need people who are willing to stay in the fight and have these deep conversations. How are we going to learn as a culture to have long-form conversations? It's through example. It's through experience. It's through seeing how these things work. Hey, I can change my mind on something. Here's what that looks like. Which, by the way, that's not easy to do. Hey, let me show you what a multi-point argument looks like. Let me show you that I can patiently hear your argument out. I can show that maybe I don't quite fully understand your argument. Even though I am coming from a place where I think I disagree with you, let me dive deeper into that so I can make sure that you've communicated everything that you need to communicate from your side. Because I'll tell you what, you're never going to win someone over to your position if they haven't fully communicated their position to you. It's a two-way street. This isn't something where like you could just like beat things into people's heads. You actually have to use this human dynamic called persuasion. That's a learned skill. So my encouragement is that if you have any inkling of participating in these communications or in these conversations online, clearly you keep getting drawn into them. You see something and you're the type of person that like you're going to say something. If you're that person, don't get discouraged by people that are going to troll you. Don't get derailed. Take the moral high ground. Recognize that your leadership in that thought sphere, your example, is setting the tone for social media communication and exchanges. We're in this growing period, in this period where we're experiencing these growth pains with social media. As a society, we're not sure how we're going to communicate. We're not really sending letters as much anymore. I don't know when the last time was that I sent an email to my friend that wasn't like a business partner. How do we communicate? Well, texts, short. Facebook, short. Like we need to figure this out, and pretty quick, probably in the next 5 years or so. The other thing that I want you to recognize is that for someone to change their mind, that's a big deal. And I think that we have I think we have too high of an expectation when we enter into a conversation with people. We think that if we could just explain ourselves, communicate all the facts that we know, that someone's just going to switch sides. It's not going to happen, and you know that. I don't need to tell you that, but I think it needs to be said, because we don't think about that when we're going into a conversation. This is not a sprint in each conversation. It's a marathon. It's a matter of us presenting a view, presenting intelligent reflection, presenting reason. And over time, that gets brought into people's, minds, and they eventually, it's never a flip. It's always a gradual progression. I think it was Gracian Baltazar says, the truth is the truth is generally seen, rarely heard. People aren't going to just listen to the truth that you have to say. They want to see it over time. They want to live with it and feel it and experience it. So whether you are coming from the Trump camp or the Biden camp or the Republican but not Trump camp or the Libertarian camp or wherever you're coming from, what you need to present is your story, your narrative. And a lot of times that involves facts. And so present those facts, but just recognize that it's going to take a lot for someone to change their mind. And you're not just going to do it in one setting. The other thing that I'll say about that, I think we need to have more compassion. And I'm going to talk about this more some other time. We need to have more compassion on people that are in that state of flux. Maybe there's some cognitive dissonance you're talking to someone and you could tell there's some cognitive dissonance there. Stop bullying. Stop berating them and, knocking them in the head with the 2x4 of your facts. We need to be more sensitive. We need to have more empathy for people. You might not remember the last time you changed your mind on something, or you may not have publicly humiliated yourself or lowered yourself to the point of recognizing fault. But it's a difficult thing to do. And so I just think that we need to have a little bit more empathy for people that are in that spot. Anyways, that's my little 10-minute spiel for tonight, just on my mind. If you have any thoughts, and if you've made it to 12 minutes, I'd love to hear from you. I don't think there's anything groundbreaking that I'm saying. I think we all know it, but I think we're so distracted by what's going on in the news, in government right now, that we're not talking about the talking on Facebook. We're not talking about the type of people that we've become on Facebook, the type of conversations we're having. I think we need to get back to that. All right, thanks.